Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Henry Gilroy, co-executive producer of Star Wars Rebels. You're listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Welcome to Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast here on the Nerd Party Network, coming at you for moribund. I gotta say, this place is better than its reputation. It's windy, it's hot, and it's sandy, so basically Anakin hates it. And I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as he is every single week, the aforementioned John Mills.
Or am I an illusion of John Mills, trapped in a hellish sort of tomb-like state where I can... well, no, I'm not that because I don't have Mark Hamill's voice.
That's true, you don't.
Yeah, just me.
Yeah.
Just me. But I'm more excited about our special guest, Matt.
That's so true. John, so recently we've been talking a lot about the sequel era. We've been covering a lot of that stuff, and we thought it would be kind of fun to kind of celebrate the fact that, one, the Clone Wars is coming back in February. But not only that, but it's going to be coming back to streaming service because Disney Plus is going to start in about a month from now, a little over a month from now. So because of all of that, we thought it would be fun to kind of celebrate the Clone Wars the next couple of weeks. We're going to have some special guests talking about the Clone Wars. And we're very excited to have back our good friend and editor for the Clone Wars, Nic Anastassiou.
Well, thanks, Matt. And it's my pleasure to be on my favorite Star Wars podcast, actually the only Star Wars podcast as far as I'm concerned. It's really a pleasure to be on with you guys to talk about one of the things I love most with two of the people who I'm lucky to call awesome friends.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. That's really nice.
Yeah. All right. Yay. All the warm fuzzies, even though we're about to go to some dark places with what we're talking about this week.
All the more reason.
Yes, right.
Everybody get your warm fuzzies out now. Well, before we do dive into what we're going to be talking about this week, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can get Aggressive Negotiations or any podcast from the Nerd Party Network. But if you're on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, we would love for you to give us a star rating and review. Nic mentioned the fact that there are a lot of Star Wars podcasts out there, and if you like this Star Wars podcast, please do help us by giving us a star rating review so people will find the show when they search for Star Wars podcasts. You can find, like I said, anywhere you get your podcasts. You can find us on Twitter at The Jedi Masters. That's the Twitter account for the show. So if you're not already following us there, follow us there. And we love talking about Star Wars each and every week on the Twitter. But we also like talking about all sorts of things revolving around Star Wars, not just what we talked about here on the show. Nothing but Star Wars love there. You can find us on at Join Nerd Party. That's the entire network. We're on the nerdparty.com. You can find us on the nerdparty.com/contact, where you can choose a show there, choose Aggressive Negotiations, and that comes to John and I as an email. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/the Nerd Party. So all of those places you can get contact with us. Now, Nic, we thought it would be so great to have you on because we're really excited, obviously, that the Clone Wars is coming back. And we kind of opened up the floor for you to be able to choose any arc that you wanted to be able to talk about. And you chose the Yoda arc. And so I just wanted to ask you, what led you to choose that arc to want to kind of dive in with us about as we look back at, I would say, one of the most pivotal arcs of the whole Clone Wars era?
Well, it's you guys, actually. You take the blame. Initially when you mentioned that, I kind of went through to my sort of top 4 or 5 arcs, the ones that I liked the most for reasons XYZ, and there was the Youngling arc, and there was the Night Sisters arc, and a couple of others, and it was really kind of a spontaneous spur of the moment, I was basically trying to decide between those 3 or 4. And then I was actually listening to you guys. It was whatever, a couple weeks ago, I think. And, it just kind of all jumped in my mind. Like, I really love the way you guys get into these discussions that have to, regardless of the topic you pick, regardless of whether it has to do with one particular sort of medium for Star Wars stories, novels, one of the trilogies, the Clone Wars, Rebels, or a random topic, but you kind of pull these very specific things that have to do with a moment, a scene, and at the same time can go in depth into a broad concept about the mythology of the universe. And so that kind of got me like, right. I was thinking, okay, I want to pick something which is something that I haven't watched in a while about the Clone Wars, instead of like the ones that I always go to first, and be something that has a lot of this, a lot of things that are specific and at the same time very broad and deep about the Star Wars universe. And so the moment that I thought about that came to my mind. I was like, oh, this is a story that I remember but I haven't seen. I worked on it, but I haven't seen it in a while, and I know that it has things that are very specific to the Star Wars timeline that we know surrounding it, but that also has a lot of really broad ideas about the Star Wars mythology and the broad concepts of StarArs. And so that crystallized it.
So I'm kind of wondering, for you having, worked on the show, obviously, and, this being such a kind of watershed moment, it was going to be the last arc that people would see. But what were the things that, as you got a chance to rewatch it, that really surprised you about what it was that George and Dave were saying in this last arc? Because at that point, this was going to be the last thing we'd ever seen for the Clone Wars era. And so what was it that you felt like was just being added here that surprised you, maybe?
Well, first, I'm glad you framed it in context of George and Dave, because I certainly don't mean to sound self-congratulatory. And without that, I was afraid it would, because it's really not about me. But I was blown away. And like I said, I remembered it, but rewatching it now, and I'm so glad that I picked one of the arcs that I haven't watched in a while. I was really blown away, and that ties into your question, because what really kind of made me feel warm and fuzzy, to come back to what we were saying early on, is it's the love and care, the obvious love and care and understanding for all these things that create the canvas and the fabric of what is Star Wars storytelling. And by that, there's things that have to do with the story elements, meaning, okay, we've already talked about that in this movie or in that episode, so we're going to bridge the gap, or we're going to explain this. So there's specific story points, but then there's also a methodology about the way you tell a Star Wars story, and the way that you can tell a Star Wars story which respects the rules of the world, the rules of that type of narrative, and at the same times can be original. The way that you can tell a story which can be big and epic, but also small and intimate. The way that you can tell a story which can successfully be tragic when it needs to be, and heavy, but at the same time has levity and funny. And for all the talk that you hear everywhere, on the internet, on either side of the professional and the fan world, of the difficulty or the impossibility, and people saying, oh, you have to choose one or the other, and no. I go back to this, and it's really refreshing to see that there is a way that it could be all wrapped together in a successful package. And that's what telling a Star Wars story is. That's what telling a story which is a fable, which is for children, but which has big ideas, which leaves you with really serious thoughts without being too graphic or too heavy, and can be funny without being silly. You can do it, and there's a sense of adventure. And I was just really, it was a beautiful moment for me, to watch this and kind of get to sit down and see it all unfold and be like, wow, look, there's all these elements. There's the prequels. There's the original trilogy. There's the way that it's shot. There's this kind of escaping, action adventure moment. There's this comedy moment. There's these big, heavy, almost Shakespearean tragedy moments, and it all works together. There's a sense of cohesion to it at the same time. It doesn't feel like this kind of, just speckle of things thrown in. And that is really specific to the ground rules that George had established over the time that he had worked on Star Wars. And then the way that Dave took that, applied it, learned from it, and then, went not further in that he did more, but that he kept going on the path. George set him on the road, and then Dave kind of just kept on, took that ball and ran with it, and it works. And it's we had clunkers on the Clone Wars, but it's great when you watch an arc where you really see it all come together. And I was really happy to kind of have this fresh take on it when I sat down.
Keying off of something you said, what I think really sets this arc and so many of the successful arcs with the Clone Wars apart, just in terms of every superlative that you could throw at it, is that there is definitely a sense here that there are certain dots being connected in terms of Yoda getting to Dagobah for the first time or something like that. But in what we're more used to with connected universe stuff nowadays, it's more that those are things that I don't want to say don't have importance usually, but they don't have the same sort of thrust. And so you wind up with an arc that is, seeing an opportunity not just to move something along in a very stable and predictable way, but something that sees this opportunity as a place to really stretch the imagination and push people to continue thinking about things in a different way. And there's a sense of, and this is what I love about everything that's great about Star Wars, is this sense of childlike enthusiasm to want to tell a huge epic story. You sit down with kids and you see them string stories together. Well, what about this? And then it can blossom into this whole other beautiful thing on its own. And I think this arc is like that, where it could have been something where it was just, okay, A got to B, got to C, got to D. And instead it is, you come out at the end of it thinking, I had never considered so many possibilities about what I just saw until now.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, John. And I think that the other thing, the three of us were texting one another a couple of days ago, and I talked about, I was telling you about the idea of inspiration, and I think that this is a perfect case in point. This is what you see, in my opinion, happen when creatives, whatever their medium is, are themselves inspired, and they, the source of their inspiration, it can be a raw emotion, it can be a color, a sound, a memory, a message that they're trying to put down on paper or on screen. But whatever that is, that's animating them, and the desire to express themselves in the medium that they're of their choice is translated, is really kind of conveyed in their language. And you see then it's a form of love, and you see that love kind of come together. There's the opening scene with Plo Koon. I remember, Dave kind of, when we were doing the story launches, talking about the opening scene of Close Encounters and the feelings that it had created in him when he first saw the movie, and the sense of wonder and mystery and the hook, not just from a plot device standpoint, that too, but how it just automatically creates this sense of wonder. What is going on? And you don't quite know whether it's something that you should be scared of or that you should be excited about, and I remember a lot of talk about transcribing something similar into the opening scene, with Plo Koon. And so there's similar moments peppered through with different intent, different emotions. And this is what I'm talking about, the sense of kind of inspiration and love that goes, and attention to detail. It's kind of like making a model. And this is one thing that I was really happy, rewatching it, both just completely as a fan, and then having memories of working on the parts that I was involved with, the 2 episodes that I edited. But it is just kind of, you see kind of the knowledge. It's studying the medium, understanding it, loving it, and then when it's something that Dave imparted on us. We were talking, a couple of months back, and he was kind of getting together with the crew, both the old folks, who I'm among now, and the younger ones, and he was saying, it's a twofold process, and you need both halves of the equation. There's the part where you are first exposed to this material, this medium, this story, this universe, and it affects you. You love it. There's a reaction that you get which engages you, and then the turn. It's your time to come. To go at bat, and now you have to work in that medium, and at that point you have a responsibility to take all the things that inspired you and the love, and then really apply yourself to transcribe that in a way which makes sense and kind of sort of closes the loop. And from that opening scene I mentioned, and then when you see the different kind of parts of the Star Wars world, there's the politics. I'd forgotten about the moments, the scene where Yoda goes to see Valorum, and there's this whole political intrigue, which is reminiscent of Episode 1, but Attack of the Clones a lot. There's these great lightsaber fights that we choreographed. And there you see a mix of Episode 3 and Return of the Jedi. And at the same time, as you see these things which kind of echo the things about and are meant to, show the understanding of how these pieces correlate, you also have a genuine desire to tell a new part of the story. And, I thought that was great. Like, for me, the way that Dagobah is presented, even though it's a planet we know, there's something very different about the way that we introduce it as part of the story. And then, of course, the fates and these characters, the role they play, and the idea of, this is another thing that I George did a lot in the Star Wars universe, which I really, really liked, is it's putting in story elements, characters, scenes, mentioning things which explain or sort of give you a form of sort of world building, but at the same time are meant to make you wonder and fill in your own blanks. And that's, again, it goes back to inspiration. It's not supposed to just kind of lay down everything and kind of tick all the boxes. It's supposed to give you some information, but also kind of stimulate your own ability to dream and create your own explanation, your own story, your own background, and do that in 1,000-fold for 1,000 different little things about what's happening, what you're seeing. I mean, he did it even in the original trilogy, which has kind of a more narrow window because it follows a straight through line, the Skywalker, Luke's story, and then, his father. There's like part of what I think made our generation really wander as kids is more than pretty much any story we had seen on screen. At that point, you would see things, and as you were cutting from shot to shot, you'd be like, wait, what was that? I wonder what that means. I mean, you see the Bomar monks just walk in the background, Jabba's temple, and you're like, what the heck is that? What is this thing that's just, what? I want to know more about that thing. And that happens, 32 times in each shot. You see something and you're like, I want to know that story. I want to go to this place, And so that's one of the things that I thought was really exciting. I was kind of recaptured in that same sense. When I watched this arc at the end, I caught myself thinking, man, the only thing I'm disappointed about is that I'm not watching this being 12 years old.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because I consider this arc to also be the sort of storyline that I can see. I think this is one of those ones that illustrates most clearly how the same storytelling impulse gave us both Star Wars and THX 1138, which, THX is a movie that's hard to square coming from the same sort of impulses that formed Star Wars in terms of, film storytelling and everything. But I think that this arc, you can look at it and you can see, okay, I see the commonalities between them now. I see how they function. And in terms of how layered, to speak to what you're saying, like how layered they really are, and how it's always been there, in its DNA, and how rich it is as a result, and why there are all of these opportunities. It's almost as if everything has been layered in such a way that it's built in this sense of trust that if I don't have a specific piece of a part of a story, either not that it's going to be fed to me, but I always have a sense that it's there, that it is part of a whole. I just haven't seen the whole picture yet. So I think that it creates this reassuring sense of, just because I don't have the story of that one thing in the background or this one bridging piece, I still have confidence that it's there. And if I have to come up with it, well, then if everything worked right, I can, and I will. Or I'll just, sate myself with the idea that there was a reason the story was told to me that way.
Well, there's also this thing that I thought was really interesting. I just listened to both of you guys, and one of the things that sticks out to me is how this story tells a very grounded part of the Star Wars story, which is how you get the clones created, the way in which Tyrannus, betrays Sifo Dyas and uses him, which, John, would be fascinating for us to talk about how that fits in with Dooku Jedi Lost sometime.
Oh, yeah.
But so all of those type of things, it's very grounded storytelling in the sense of, like, we're talking about the reality of the political intrigue to the most esoteric part of Star Wars maybe we've ever seen on screen, where we're meeting Force priestesses and planets that emanate the living Force through the midichlorians out into the universe. And, like, that's the thing that I think is most amazing, is that George can do both with his storytelling, and at the same time it all fits together, and you never question this arc, like where you're going. It all fits together perfectly to lead Yoda on this arc, which is going to get him to the place to where he doesn't believe they can necessarily live in the Clone Wars anymore, but he does believe there's a possibility of them winning for all time. Like, this has gone beyond just the here and the now. This is about the Force and the reality of existence for all time to come. And I think there's just something so incredible with that. And especially, I'll say before the sequel trilogy came along, how it all played in perfectly with what we would get in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think that, I mean, what you both said kind of, fits. There's, to your point, John, I think what you're talking about, what you're touching on is when you are really good at telling the type of story that Star Wars tells, which is, what George did and then Dave, and which is this arc fits perfectly as the template of what Star Wars storytelling is. You are, by definition, really good at telling a story which may have elements that are completely mysterious and unexplained, and yet at the same time, you don't have the problem that a lot of people will tell you will hit if you try to go to that type of world, which is, exposition, and we have to give a lot of information. Because when you're good at it, when you're really good at it, when you're the best at it, you do it using archetypes, which then, no matter how strange and unexplained and mysterious the wrapper around it is, the person knows instantly what it is you're talking about. So you can have a character say something, and Star Wars does that all the time, which literally is gobbledygook. And yet the person knows exactly what they're saying, because they understand, based on the shape of the character, based on the sounds they make, based on the point in the story where they're talking, they know exactly what is being conveyed and what the point of that moment is. And so I think this is what, to your point, Matt, it's what you see in there, where you have also this duality where you're able to kind of then have a very linear narrative, which follows, sort of storytelling elements that are along the lines of some of the prequels. Like, you have the political intrigue and the suspense and kind of almost film noir-esque aspect of kind of an investigation. But then you also have these very big top-down concepts, and the two are able to handle one another, and you as the viewer, you're able to handle it all, and it makes sense, because that's the thing, is it's all archetypal. And the best kind of archetype, this is something that, Jim Cameron is also, in my opinion, a director who does that really well. And I think it infuriates a lot of people, both those who love him and those who hate him. I think they usually, even if they come at it from different extremes, it's for the same reason. It's because he may have a line of dialogue that's extremely corny or not very, original. He may show you a shot that you understand perfectly. And so some people will say, well, that's, I know that story, I know that template, but that's why it works, because he knows exactly what he needs to show you, when he needs to show it to you, and what needs to be said for you to know exactly what this is about, with a minimum of extra information. And this is the same thing. Like, I think that it was fortuitous, because I didn't think of it when I picked it, but I'm so glad that I chose this arc, because I think that it really works well that way, and it also touches then on all these really big ideas of what George was trying to convey through Star Wars in terms of spirituality, and which I really respond to, and his idea of it being that it's not driven by any single dogma of rules or anything specific, but that's the beauty of faith at the end of the day, with capital F, is the complete absence of label. It's this, pure belief is when you don't try to explain on any level, and it's not just a science versus faith. It's even like within itself, faith doesn't explain itself. And you see that it's one of I really, really love those moments when first Yoda is in the Bacta tank, and there's this moment where they're trying to lead him to this vision by scientific method, and Qui-Gon, as he's starting to kind of come to this vision, Qui-Gon tells him, no, this is not the right way to do it. You're trying to go about it in too much of a linear scientific process. You have to let go, and you have to just believe. And this is kind of sort of I want to say a more common kind of popular way to juxtapose sometimes the debate of like science and spirituality. But what's cool is that, because I think that can actually be detrimental to both faith and science. And then, in my opinion, what I love is that he kind of goes further. And when you have Yoda and Qui-Gon talking, you get the sense that where Qui-Gon is leading Yoda is that if you really want to get at the core of that idea, is that even within the faith of the Jedi themselves and their belief in the Force, if you really want to have access, and that's the trials really that Yoda has to get to, is to stop trying to explain and stop trying to break things down and just go with pure belief. Don't even rely on the dogma and the rules of the Force and the texts and what the Jedi rites are, but just go with your belief, what you know inside your heart. And like, for example, when he tells them, to me, like a really good example of that is at the end when Yoda says, well, how will I find this place? And then Qui-Gon tells him, the Force will guide you. There's literally no explanation in the story for where Yoda gets to in the next part. And that's not for lack of the ability to explain it, because we can always come up with it's easy to write in a cheap plot device to say, oh, go to X, which will give you the holocron or the map or, the doorway to that, and then you will get to this magical place. The point of that is to say you find that place by understanding that you don't have to figure out, how do I find that place? If you believe you'll find it, you'll find it. It doesn't explain itself either through astromech droid or through some kind of ancient Jedi text which has the secret map that you have to go find, etc. It's just faith is just believing without the need to explain on any level. And I think that goes to a lot of like big ideas within the Star Wars timeline. If you want to talk about like the fall of the Jedi, and I know, we've talked about this, you guys have talked about that at length on the podcast, but like, and you see these limitations in other Jedi characters, like, for me, Mace Windu is a perfect example of someone who is so held back by the dogma and by the rules that in the end, it causes his downfall, and it's instrumental in causing the downfall of the thing that he holds dearest. You see that a little bit with Ki-Adi-Mundi in this arc, and the fact that he's trying to like put these things into boxes. If X leads to Y, then clearly we must think Z. And in the end, that's not really the way it works out, is it?
Well, that's something that I was just thinking as you're saying that. That's one of the reasons I love the way that this connects with Episode 2, and Obi-Wan and Yoda and Mace are having that conversation in the temple, and they're talking about how arrogance in Jedi has become a more common feature and a flaw, even in some of the older Jedi. And so what do we see in this arc but Yoda being confronted by his arrogance and thinking that he knows everything, because he even tells the priestess, "This I know," when she's explaining about, the midichlorians and the Force and all that stuff. And yet he has to face that. And then, I was thinking about the way in which there is why can't Mace move this way, but somebody like Obi-Wan is, and like you see those two kind of playing these opposite sides of like Obi-Wan having complete faith and trust in not only just the Force but really Yoda. He truly believes Yoda and trusts Yoda, and his faith is in him. It seems for good reasons. Whereas Mace is kind of like you're saying, he's bound in by these boxes and these rules and everything. And it's like these characters, and it goes all the way to the fall of the Jedi, just being lost in losing their true one faith in the living Force, as Qui-Gon had. And you can see why the lineage allows these certain characters then to be given these gifts to which they've been chosen. Like, Qui-Gon even says to Yoda, "You have been chosen for this gift." Specifically, like, the Force has chosen you. and it just as it chose him before that. And, so these different characters are being given this opportunity because there is something about them which hasn't been fully corrupted by that dogma, and allows them to be open to there being more than they ever thought possible. I think there's just something to that. You can never believe that you have it all down. The moment you do is the moment you really don't know anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned that earlier, Matt. It's one of those things about George and the ideas, his beliefs, and his ability to express them in a way that I find beautiful and very relatable, universal. When he talks, it's another one of my favorite scenes at the end. That this really touching moment where Yoda says, "I'm starting to understand that the concept of winning a war does not exist. There's no such thing as winning a war, because the moment you involve yourself in a war, you've already lost. Getting to that point where you fight is already then having lost the greater, or failed the greater trial. And so the best you can hope at that point is to learn from that very statement, that war in and of itself, no matter what side you choose, no matter what the justification, is a defeat in and of itself." And it's a scene that is able to, I think, deliver that message, which I see throughout the episode. Even though you have these big archetypes and the visuals support kind of this iconography of good versus evil, the choice of color palettes, kind of everything sort of goes with the traditional sort of fairy tale, childlike bedtime story of good versus evil. You also have a very, very strong underlying current of message that sort of says, it's not about I'm the good guy and you're the bad guy. Even Sidious and Dooku, in my opinion, are not their characters. The way that they're represented makes you obviously see them as the villains of the story, but you don't think of them as evil incarnate. Not even Sidious. He doesn't come across as this thing which is, okay, it was evil given shape, or it was something that was born evil. What I get out of it is these characters who are led by a series of choices to a path, and as the doors close, as you make a choice and then another choice and another choice, and then eventually the board is set, and eventually you are on one side, but it's not because you are that. It's just you have made yourself get to this path. And when you see the fact that the trials that Yoda faces are things that are more about parts of him more than things that are directly outside of him, evil forces, that helps you relate to Dooku and Sidious as things like that. Also, are as things that are not necessarily pure evil, as in, okay, I'm good, and then this evil thing exists outside of me, but as facets of us, parts of us. And then you see, I think it's reinforced by the fact that throughout the story, you are able, there's no fear to remind you that Dooku was not born the way, he was not born a Sith Lord. He was a Jedi. You are even shown a moment where you can interpret however you want, whether it's an alternate timeline, whether it's an illusion, but you're shown Dooku as a Jedi. You're shown Dooku standing with Qui-Gon, and even Sidious, I don't feel sorry for him, but the story shows him in a way that almost makes me feel sorry for him, because you see this character who embodies, at the point you see him, everything that Yoda has been taught. which is it's fear incarnate more than evil incarnate. It's a character who has become so afraid that he has driven himself choice after choice after choice to be the way he is. You see somebody who clearly is very smart, clearly is very powerful, but yet has driven himself to use all the resources he has to this really kind of nefarious end because of poor choices. And to me, it's more pathetic and to be pitied than to hate and say, oh, well, there's the bad guy and I'm the good guy and I have to just defeat evil. It's a much greater lesson, I think.
Yeah, when you make the choice between selfishness instead of selflessness, and the way that those two play out, which is really in the end what Star Wars is all about.
Yeah, and I think there's also something inevitably Tolkien-esque, keying on what you said about war, Nick, where no matter how the Clone Wars are going to turn out, it's just like the war in Lord of the Rings. The world's never going to be the same afterward. No matter which side, quote unquote, wins, you can't go home again. Things are changed. Things are irrevocably different, and the world enters a new age. And those who are left feel a little bit of the diminishment because, you've entered into this new era and you belong in some way to the old era. And so you at the end of the Lord of the Rings, even though Sam is there, well, I don't have to worry about spoilers for Lord of the Rings, right?
No,
even though Sam is there, he's got that sadness about him because everything has moved on, and even the Shire isn't what it once was. And so even doing something where you're involved in a just war, in a war that needs to be fought, however you want to frame it or look at the different instances throughout history, there's inevitably this sadness that no matter what you've done, you've taken part in something that's going to forever change the way things are.
Well, and that just ties into something, Nick, you were saying, and just that was sticking out to me, that when Yoda says that about the path to victory, not the Clone Wars for all time, he says, yet open to us a path remains that unknown to the Sith is. And the path he's talking about is this path that's been open to him of being able to project yourself from the Force, from the netherworlds of the Force, and be able to impact the future, because you can come back. You can continually reshare the lessons to which you have learned over and over again to the next generations. And in many ways, like it's almost like the Star Wars version of having history right there, but not just a history book, but literally the person who lived the history be able to teach you the reasons to why certain things are the right ways to choose, certain things are the wrong ways to choose, and truly get that life lesson, but from the living being. And so there's just this beauty in it. To me, it's like that. I love this arc because of the way that George truly explained the importance then of these Jedi being able to impact the future in this way, and what a gift that is, and what that means for just us as a great lesson of being students of history and learning from it so we don't make those same mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, that actually brings up a visual, which I think is very beautiful, very powerful, and really speaks to what I was trying to describe when I talked about sort of the care, the inspiration, the love that goes into this type of storytelling. The last shot, this slow camera crane up the tree that goes from the leaves, the yellow leaves that are on the ground, and the idea of fall and autumn and sort of this idea of a descent, kind of a change of time, like John said, and the fact that regardless of what happens, the season, spring and summer have passed, and the camera cranes and ends on. There's still these yellow, dying leaves in the background, but then in the foreground, there's a greener bud, and then there's this slow fade to black, and that
Talk about a Lord of the Rings reference with the Tree of the King.
Yeah.
tree, yeah, of course, but and following that visual, following Yoda's last lines. It's a very subtle but powerful way to communicate visually an idea, and iconography, when it's well done, when it's understood and well used, will leave stronger impression than any word, any explanation, any soliloquy. And I thought that was so craftfully done, because this is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier. That's what you get when you have an understanding of storytelling in general, of the visual language in general, and then storytelling in the Star Wars universe, the understanding of what Star Wars is about, generally and specifically. And you say, okay, when you have really strong mastering of all these concepts, you get visuals and story moments like that, where you can do something incredibly subtle and slight and still have a very strong effect. You don't need to be overt. You don't need to be obvious, because your understanding allows you to communicate just as well, if not better, without being bunk on the head with, this is what Star Wars is about, this is what the message is. And when that last shot came up, I was just reminded again, in a slightly more modern context. I was like, well, this is what every message, what every moment that succeeds in Star Wars, in the original trilogy, in the prequels, this is what it is. This is where it Star Wars tells itself to the world without spelling itself out.
Yeah, and I think also that there is a very important stage being set, and I think that we've probably talked about this on the show before or something, but there's this sense throughout this entire arc of opening a door, but not just to tying things together between the prequels and the originals or anything like that, but in light of certain comments that were made to James Cameron in his History of Science Fiction series about some of the ideas that were out there that Lucas wanted to explore about the Force and everything. If he were to have made the sequels, taking those comments that he shared with Cameron and looking at certain things in this really underscores, I think, that this entire arc would have been a doorway to something even bigger and more mind melting in terms of what was coming down the pike, or what was hoped for in the future, sort of thing. And so when I look at this arc, I see also something where my appetite is always whetted for what was, the springboard, what a springboard this was for any future series, if such a thing were to ever have materialized.
Yeah, I mean, I think George, as an older, more mature filmmaker and storyteller and person, I think on the one hand, everyone, as they get older, creatives, artists, sometimes, I mean, when you're younger, you tend to be more maybe in the craft of, I almost want to say hip with it, in terms of like, to stick with cinema, the latest way to shoot a scene, the latest type of film stock, or now, the latest digital camera, or you're going to be kind of pushing the envelope more of what to do with the medium. And maybe sometimes as you get older as an artist, you're not as much with that sort of edginess. But what you get, especially when you're someone who, to begin with, as an artist, even when you're young, already has kind of a very rich inner world and inner dialogue, is you get somebody who starts to really, I mean, we all, if we get to that age, we start to get more introspective, and we start to have kind of, we've been around the wheel a few times. And so as you start to see the patterns of the cycles, you start to kind of see also what's relevant, what's not relevant, what's just cyclical versus what is not. And that informs kind of, I think, a deeper, richer understanding of the world, and also then of fictional narratives. And you talked about Tolkien earlier. You see the same thing in Tolkien. As he was getting older, and he was less concerned and less interested, I would even say, in kind of linear narrative storytelling. He wasn't even trying, I think, to hide the fact that he was less interested in telling a story in the traditional sense. And yet his world building never became less interesting, because it was as it was sort of like, you could say, I don't think of it like that, but you could say, as it was losing cohesion kind of a little bit in terms of linear storytelling, it was getting that much richer in terms of the deeper meaning and the things that you could relate on that level. Even if you didn't have to be, 50, 60 or 70 to understand, because those speak to things which, even if we don't have the exact words, we get, I think, from a very young age, we understand these concepts. And so I think it's the same thing with someone like George. You see, as he becomes more mature as a storyteller and as a man, you see his interest deepen. And so they might not be as much on the surface of the linear storytelling, the choice of a specific shot or camera angle, but they become really rich in terms of the far reaches of the story and the meaning. And even when it's something about, like, the character gets on his ship and goes from point A to point B, you see that it's animated and motivated by a thought that operates at a much larger top-down level. And I think in my opinion, that's, I think, what you're reacting to is this perception of, like, someone who's really kind of starting to see the world at a really big level, and that kind of is imbued in every aspect of his stories.
One of the things I think that I really loved about this arc was all the places, that we went, like going to the Pike home world, and, going back to Dagobah, going to Moribond, seeing this ancient home of the Sith, getting an aspect of just how old the galaxy is. But, then I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like is this the first time that we've seen Sith magics like this? Aside from the Dathomiri witches, which have their own version of magic. But I feel like this is the first time we've really seen a Sith, magic session, which we'll see, we see in Rebels with the World Between Worlds, but again, George seemed to be introducing all of these new things, and this one was one that just really caught my eye because John, you and I have been talking about the sequel trilogy so much, and the poster for the sequel trilogy, the new one that just came out, has that bluish lightning look at the bottom that looks just like what they're creating in that bowl, which was really interesting to me. So just like
the blue fire bowl, right?
What I'm trying to say is, in all of this, is just how much George was throwing at us, even at the end here. Really, like you were talking about, both of you guys, like adding all of these things, which we may never get complete answers for, but leave our imaginations reeling with possibility.
Yeah, and I think this is where, as a fan, I respond. This is where I could use a story like this and say, okay, if I was teaching a class on Star Wars storytelling, I would say this is how you do it, because it has these classic elements that we know from previous Star Wars, from the original trilogy, from the prequels, which at this point were like there was no sequel trilogy. And so, you can definitely pick up on elements, whether it's characters like Valorum, or whether it's places like Dagobah, or whether it's, because it goes deeper in the way that certain scenes are shot. The music, it's meant to echo the prequels and the original trilogy. But it's not, what makes it not a sort of shallow fan service gimmick is that these elements being there is used as a way to strengthen the addition to the canvas. It's basically saying, chapter 3 is part of this world because, look, there are the things that you know about that were in chapters 1 and 2. So, there's motivation, which is what said the heart of good storytelling. It's make sure that whatever you do, big and small, is motivated, that there's a reason for it. And here, you see Dagobah. And yes, it harkens back to Empire Strikes Back. But it's not just throwing you Dagobah to wink, nudge at the camera and say, there's Dagobah, you liked it in Empire, so we're giving it back to you. It's there so that then you can go to this new planet and you really feel that that this planet is fully integrated into the bigger story and has this legitimate role, because now it's just been reconnected to this other thing, which from an essential part of the saga. And so now you've used this part as a story device to say that's what makes this part as believable and important and exciting. And you're advancing. You're still going forward. You're not just going back. You're not just doing nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. You're not just saying, okay, this is what you like, so I'm repackaging it. You're actually kind of you're integrating the whole. And you're making a greater sum, and you're saying, okay, now I'm adding another chapter.
Yeah, it's just it's so much to take in and sort of process, because even as we're sitting here discussing, there are so many things that come to the forefront. As we've experienced this arc ourselves a couple of times, and now just having this conversation, there's even more about it that peels, like the proverbial onion, where you just keep going. And it seems that this is probably this is probably one of the strongest arcs in the entire series, specifically because it feels like you can never pick at it too much. There's so much layered in here. There's so many different things that you can pull through. And I think that one of those things most clearly is this fact that it emphasizes, without, I think, specifically saying it per se, but it would be very easy to say, well, Yoda went on this journey, and then why didn't he just blurt all of this stuff out immediately to everybody at the end of it? And I think that it carries that sort of weight to it just with that one simple line, because you talk about the economy of storytelling and, you know, when it works and everything, where it is, I think, Matt, you might have pointed out the line that Yoda has been chosen for this lesson. And so even though Yoda goes on this hero's journey and comes back with the boon for everybody. So he's gone on his own hero's journey, gone down to hell, come back out, and he has the mystical truth that can power the future victory for everyone. He also has wisdom coming back with him that this isn't something that everybody is ready to have laid on them. You know, this is knowledge that has to be earned and given in a measured fashion.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you're right. I think there's also an aspect of it which ties into something you guys talked about in one of your previous podcasts a few weeks ago, when you guys talked about time and space, you know, in the Star Wars universe. And the way that I interpret it is Yoda at this point starts to understand, to be taught the notion that as great as the knowledge and understanding of the universe that the Jedi have is, it is nothing compared to the actual master plan, if you will, if you could look at it from the outside. You know, in words, which themselves are limited because they're words that Qui-Gon can communicate to him and the Fates can communicate to him, he's being told from the very concept, and this is what ties into what you guys were talking about, that, you know, what you think of as the future and the past and the present is actually that this is a very, very sort of linear, you know, small way of looking at the way the master plan unfolds. And so I think he's told in some ways, he's not told keep it secret. You know, he's not threatened. He's not told you have to not tell. I mean, Qui-Gon tells him don't tell anyone, but I don't think that it's before he leaves. I think it's more about the journey. Don't tell anyone you're going on this journey. And I think he's not telling him that as a sense of like, you have to keep whatever you find out to yourself. It's more, I think, a warning that what you're going to be shown, what you're going to be given a glimpse into is not something that even you can fully comprehend, because and you're the greatest of all the Jedi, but you're still stuck in this kind of linear way of conceiving existence. And the only way and it goes back to faith, the only way it's going to play out, if it's going to play out, is if you have faith in the master plan, whatever it is, and you don't question it, and you don't question it, among other things, by trying to inject yourself, by having the presumption to think that you can then kind of grab the reins and say, if I take this action, or if I tell people, then I can change things, because it's not linear like that. And it's the pieces that are at play are so much bigger and so different than the way that a linear brain can think, that by doing something like that, even with the best of intentions, you can only actually mess things up. And I think that also ties into the idea when he says at the end, that's kind of too late, it's after the fact, when he says, now I'm starting to realize that to fight a war is a defeat in and of itself. That ties into the same philosophy, because that's, even if you're on the righteous side, and you may not have a choice, but you're basically taking action, and you're again, you may not have a choice, but if it gets to that point where you don't have a choice, it means that greater things have failed before. And you know, I mean, I remember one time George saying during a break in one of our sessions, we were talking about, he was kind of going over the philosophy of the Jedi and what that meant to him and so on and so forth. And him saying, at the end of the day, the greatest Jedi, the most powerful Jedi is the one who understands that he or she should never use the Force. They should just let the Force use them. Because the moment you use the Force, even with the best of intentions, even in the slightest of ways, you're manipulating things. And the moment you do that, you start to actually play a role into making things worse. And I think it's not advocating a philosophy of complete passivity and never doing anything. It's just saying, you have to, it's the concept of faith as an abstract and as a sort of a philosophy, to live your life by. And again, it's not faith in a specific religious dogma or specific set of rules. It's more faith as a concept of trust, and trust as a notion. And that, I think, is also why Yoda doesn't tell the others. It's, in a way, it's part of the temptation trial, right? Because if you're given this information, if you're told, well, Hitler is going to cause this, and then you're sent back to 1936, your first impulse is gonna be to say, well, I should find a way to kill Hitler. But if someone tells you you have nothing to go on, you just have to believe me that it's so complex and as impossible as it is to believe. If you try to interject yourself, if you don't play the role as the role is written for you, if you try to write the narrative yourself, if you're presumptuous enough to think that you can write your own narrative and not just follow the narrative that's written for you, things will get worse. I mean, then it's a greater test of faith to say, okay, I have to let, like Yoda finding the planet, I have to let the plot be written for me as it is, and then do the right thing as the right thing is shown to me day by day.
And I think that actually gets to why this is such a beautiful counterbalance with what Anakin does in Revenge of the Sith, and highlighting the fact that Anakin's pursuit of this type of knowledge is all selfishly motivated. It's all about, how could I use this sort of idea, this sort of manipulation of things to my greater benefit, because I don't want pain. I don't want loss. Whereas Yoda's journey here, like you said, is about learning to, let go and trust that it's going to go the way it's going to go, and that you just have to play the part that you're supposed to play in it. And Anakin fighting against that's what causes all of the pain for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and you see that play out. I mean, again, it's something that you see play out in Star Wars from the beginning. I mean, to me, the scene where Obi-Wan, puts his lightsaber up and lets Vader strike him, that's exactly the same thing. It's trust. It's knowing, okay, it's not, Obi-Wan can take action. He can try to fight Vader. He can try to defeat Vader. But, it's understanding, like Yoda finding the place he needs to go. If I don't have the arrogance to think that I can write my own narrative, but that I will be shown in my heart, I will know as each moment of my life plays out. My heart knows what is right and what is wrong. As each door opens, as each choice is made, as each corner is turned. And at that point, I have to trust then to respond to that. If you do that, then you're on the right path. And then so, rather than just try his damnedest to defeat Vader, because, hey, if I kill Vader now, then the good guys have won. Obi-Wan understands what my instinct tells me, what my heart tells me. The right thing to do is to not fight at this point and let things play out.
Well, that's something that I was noticing. I was watching this arc with my wife, and we were talking about it, and I was noticing, that Yoda is offered the same offer that Palpatine offers Anakin, which is, I'll give you the power that you want to get what you want. And Yoda says no, and because he says no, he starts the galaxy on this very slow, methodical trend towards everything being made right. and then the actions that you see, like you were talking about, like Obi-Wan that he take then in the future are the ones of patience and waiting and they're waiting for the Force to move. The Force moves, they act with the Force then, and it leads to what, we get in episode 6, where their part in the story, they only play the specific part that the Force guides them into, drops them in, they play their part, and then they don't seek to influence in any other way than exactly what the Force has given them in that moment. And they really become as close as, what you were talking about with George, where it's waiting for the Force to move you to be moved, and to act. And it's all starts with him making the decision that Anakin doesn't, which is to not choose the easy way, but to choose the much harder way, which is going to require, a lot of sacrifice, but in the end, it will lead to better peace.
Well, and the amount of pain that they undergo in the sense that they are put in a position where they can't act directly. That acting directly would actually, as you said, Nick, would make things worse. Because as they're in exile, they know what's going on in the galaxy. They know everything that's happening, and they have to make a conscious choice to sit there and say, as awful as all of this is, I have to believe that it's for a purpose and it will get there, as much as I want to go out there and control it. And that's really such a fascinating sort of thing. And I think what really gets them back to that bare bones truth, about faith, because they're coming into this period of having to be patient and wait and do all, see the galaxy go down this road right immediately after this giant war that they've been through, where they were indulging that impulse to go out and influence and fix and move things to their desired end.
Totally. And I think that, it's like, not to belabor the point, but it's basically like you guys said, it's not about, it's a tricky balance. It's not about being inactive. It's about, and that's the concept of trust, the capital T, and faith. Trust that it's not up to you to decide when the moment to take action is. That's actually the beginning of the path towards the dark side. It's because you don't have, like you were using Anakin's example perfectly, if you start, even with good intentions, to think that you are able, high enough, powerful enough, smart enough, deserving enough to decide what you should do, when you should do it, you're already down the wrong path. It's trust that when there will be a moment to take action, and it may be a big action even. It may be something that requires a lot of strength, a lot of courage. It may be a fight even, but that will be revealed to you. And it's the call to adventure, and you see it. Obi-Wan, when the time comes in the original trilogy, the moment that he's sort of quote unquote triggered, he has no problem just saying, okay, this is it. The moment is here. Now I have to go. Now I have to rouse Luke. Now we have to take action. And so it's that greater understanding, I think, of trust, that the message, it's what Qui-Gon tells Yoda. The lesson with a capital L is really, you have to trust that you will be given the message when the time is right.
Yeah, and that Shakespearean angle comes back in again with that idea of the wheel of fortune, that we would say it as like what goes around comes around. But to your point about Obi-Wan goes into action immediately, there's also the fact that once you go into action, you cannot avoid the inevitable outcome, because that wheel of fortune is going to spin around. And just like Richard III says, well, I've done these terrible things, so I know that this is going to be a ride. But if anything, it's funny because this whole conversation makes me rethink Richard III. which has always been one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, because of the fact that I've always loved that he embraced that whole idea. Once I take an action, I can't escape what's going to eventually come to me. I can't outrun the wheel. It's going to come back around, and I know how this all ends for me, but I'm just going to enjoy this as I go through it. Now, I'm not saying Obi-Wan and Yoda are going to enjoy it, go through it, but just as an illustration of both Yoda and Obi-Wan know that as soon as they take action, the series of events has started, and they can't get off of the ride until, it comes to a full stop.
So I wanted to, Nick, to be able to kind of like wrap it up together. I was wondering, getting a chance. You mentioned the fact that you hadn't rewatched this arc in a while, and so I just kind of wondered for you, what was the thing that just kind of like surprised you in this rewatch? What was the thing that just jumped out at you? You're like, oh man, like that maybe you had caught before, or maybe it was something that was just kind of slapped you across the face that, oh man, how did I not see that before?
That's a good question. I mean, I think...
well, I get paid nothing for this, so,
So no wonder. Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to... And again, this is going to sound like really horribly self-congratulatory, but I don't mean it for myself. And whatever part I played in it, it's really about the greater, like what the Clone Wars was, as a whole, as a body of work, and it was a feeling of pride, but again, not selfish pride, not pride for myself, but just for that. For the Clone Wars, watching it, I have to confess, to be honest, I was surprised. I didn't expect the extent to which, with the time that went by, I revisited it and realized the relevance and again, kind of the truth of the fact that, hey, look, you can choose this medium. You can actually tell a story. There's no excuse. You can't say, oh, it's too short, or it's animated, or you can't do this. You can't talk about that aspect and make a good Star Wars story. You can't talk about this aspect. I looked at it and I was like, this is the Clone Wars as a body of work, firing on all cylinders. And when it did things right, showing really that this message that George was trying to put out, and that's really what it's about, his intent to say, you can tell a story in this medium about that length, and you can have it be big, you can have it be epic, you can have it be a teaching tool, you can have it be funny, you can have it be inspiring, you can have it be all these things. It is possible. And like so many things, a lot of times George would come up with a concept about a technique, about a type of film, about a story, and up front he would be told by the studio, by executives, by other people, by friends, you are crazy. That does not work. You cannot do that. You cannot do something that is like this. And what surprised me about this, I didn't expect this. This is why I was surprised, is I watched this and I was like, this arc, I hadn't realized until now, because I hadn't revisited it in a while, how much it is. There are others that I know, like the Younglings arc for me was always one of those and still is. But this one I hadn't revisited in a while, and it really kind of slapped me across the face how beautifully encapsulating it is of all these things. And it works. You know, the pacing, the way it makes you kind of go on an adventure, and it teaches you these big lessons, and it's very tragic, but it's not too scary, and it's even funny at times, and you know, all of it, and it's just full of dream and magic at the same time as it's also full of science, and so just the way that it was kind of a perfect little capsule of George's message in a bottle to the world, I thought was really kind of beautiful in that sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's one of the things, like, I'm so excited that, Disney Plus is going to have, this streaming again for people to be able to find again, for those people who haven't been able to see it. I'm so excited that, fans were heard and the Clone Wars is going to be completed because of the Save Clone Wars. Clone Wars has been saved. It's coming back in February, which, means we'll have to have you on again to talk about some of those episodes as they do, which I mean, John and I are just kind of like, I don't know if frothing at the mouth is the right word, but I mean, like, just we're as excited as humanly possible, I think, for that.
No, it's right. It's the reaction from Futurama of Fry finding out what his bank account balance was in the year 3000. That's basically yeah.
Well, I mean, all I can say, and I will say this from the bottom of my heart, Dave would make, I'm sure, he would make fun of me if he heard me say this, but like, I really mean it.
Dave, you're not listening?
regardless of what comes out and how it's received, and what I can honestly say is, for me, but I know I'm not really speaking just for myself, but I will just speak for myself, is it's whatever it is that comes out, it's a new meaning to the acronym LOL, and it's just labor of love. It's awesome. It's all that is.
Oh, awesome. So cool.
Nic, if people wanted to catch up with you anywhere, is there anywhere that they could do that if they wanted to talk to you about anything Star Wars related, Clone Wars, or anything like that? Anywhere you are online?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not online much, and it's not because I'm trying to hide. It's because I'm just so dang busy these days that I really just don't have time to go on the social networks too much. But it's a good way to be absent because it's for the best of reasons. I am on Facebook though. That's kind of like my small window into the online world. So you can track me down. I'm not hiding. My account is under my name. So the best way to find me is over there on the Facebooks.
John, if people want to catch up with you, see what's going on, you've got always a plethora of things spinning in the air. Where can people find you?
Well, gosh, just look up the username Kessel Junkie. I'm more active on Letterboxd, but I'm getting more active on Twitter because, I don't know, addiction is hard to kick. And I'm also here on the network, surprisingly, maybe, but still trying to do it. Mike Schindler and I over on Retro Perspective, where we're going through 1994, revisiting each release week and picking movies and talking about them. And oh, what a joy that is. But Matt, where can people find you?
Well, pretty much any social media platform, Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram, Vero, all of those. Matt Rushing 02. I am here on the network doing another show. It's called Owlpost. I do that with Drea Kaufman, and we talk about Harry Potter each and every week. It's a lot of fun. We're actually starting the Half-Blood Prince, and so we only have 2 books left in the series. So really excited to be getting into that. You can find me on the Trek FM network. I do 2 shows. One's called The Orb with Chris Jones. We talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I do our General Geek Show, which both Nic and John have been on frequently as we talk about all of the fandoms we love, and not just Star Wars. Like Nic has been on there to talk about the Man in the High Castle. So, we don't just do Star Wars, guys. We do other stuff. And last but not least, you can find me doing a show called Cinema Stories with my good friend Courtney, and that's where we talk about films but through the lens of faith. So John, though, I think I hear the beacon calling us back to the temple. I think it's time to get back there and close these negotiations.
Master Rushing, negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.